American elections have been infected by racism and resentment. How can we equip ourselves to face the new wave of challenges encountering misinformation, lies, and problematic framing? What is our role as journalists in saving democracy and promoting civic engagement? So we have an incredible group here to examine that question. I'll introduce them. Racial Contreras is the senior justice and race reporter at Axios, covering the policies and agencies at the heart of the administration of justice and how it impacts people of color. Frankie Huang is a freelance culture writer based in New Jersey. She is the co-editor of Reappropriate, the longest-running Asian American feminist outlet online. Deborah Berry. Deborah was a 2023 Neiman Fellow. She's a national correspondent for USA Today, focusing on voting rights, civil rights, and politics. And she is based in DC. And we have Blake Stoner from Atlanta. He is the co-founder and chief reporter of Vingle, a nonpartisan grassroots news agency bringing various angles of verified coverage to communities. And I'm going to turn it over to Racial Contreras, who has kindly agreed to moderate this discussion. So let's get started.
So thank you, everybody. We're a little late, but please, it's not a stereotype. It's how we roll. I'm a little triggered here because every time I get a mic from middle school, I kind of want to go to go, and until somebody tackles me off stage. So I want to start off. A few years ago, Donald Trump was in office, and I stopped by Homegirl Cafe in Los Angeles. And if many of you don't know, this is a place started by Father Greg Boyle to reform former gang members and those who had gone to prison, dealt with drug addiction, where they teach job skills. And I'm at Homegirl Cafe, and this is a place where they take young women who had been in prison, tatted up, with little attitude, to train them about jobs. So I'm there. It was the anniversary of Robert Kennedy's death, and I'm preparing for a story, and I'm in a suit and tie. One of the homegirls, a waitress named Glenda, comes up to me and sees that I'm in a suit, working on a laptop. And as she's pouring my coffee, she's like, "What do you do? What kind of job you have?" And I looked at her, I said, "Oh, I'm a reporter, ma'am. I'm working on a story about this, but I write stories." And then she looked down at me like, "Damn, so you're Brown and a reporter? Trump must really hate your ass." And then she said, but you look like my cousin." And I stopped for a moment. "You look like my cousin." It was sort of a shock and an unbelievable fact that somebody that looked like her was in this space. So cousins, we're together. Many folks don't believe we're in this space, including some of our own people. But we're here to change that. We're about to have a good panel here, but before we start, I want to bring us back to 1910s in Texas, to bring you back to a moment that will put things in perspective. The NAACP was getting reports that down in South Texas, they were getting reports of horrific lynchings and episodes of racial violence. But there was a problem. The reports were in Spanish language newspapers and newspapers in the Caribbean. They couldn't decipher what was happening because it was a different language. So the NAACP dispatched a staffer down to Texas to find out what was going on. Look, there were cases of lynchings all over the country, but it was particularly different in Texas because the victims were Mexican American and Asian Americans. They didn't know what was happening. When the staffer got off a train, word had spread to the white supremacists that this was going on. They attacked the staffer, kidnapped him, and beat him almost to death. He left. But as a result, the same people that were doing these attacks, we know now through research, later were involved in Red Summer, attacks on black folks across the country. And we know this through the details. Why is this important? We knew then something was going on. And the white supremacists were really upset and scared that if there was any sort of black, brown, Asian unity confronting this, everything would be challenged. We're no longer in 1910. We're in 2023. There is no language barrier, and you all have the agency to change this. Cousins, we're going to hear a little part of what we do in this space because we're not going back. This is a historic gathering. Outside these steps, Frederick Douglass once walked, and he was walking alone in his thoughts. He was a person of one. We're no longer a person of one. We're a person of many. And somewhere he is here, kind of shaking his head, looking at us in awe of you. So I want to start off. The people that on stage cover a little bit a part of this phenomenon. I'm going to start with you, Deborah. You are do something at USA Today. You have a number of story ideas that come to your desk. How do you decipher what's important? Where do you look at this moment, especially as democracy is in jeopardy? What are some of the things you are looking at now? How do you come up with story ideas?
Sure. Well, some of them are kind of easy to take a look at, and that's voting rights, right? I mean, it's all in our face. We know what's happening. And it's funny, not funny, but I was away for a year on a fellowship up here. I come back a year later, and why am I still writing and thinking about the same stuff, right? In fact, it's even worse than it was when I left, which says something in itself. So part of what we're doing, or what I'm going to be doing, is doing a lot more about voting rights, the big picture, what it looks like, what it means in your community, what does it mean when you get ready to go vote, where you vote, those kind of things. It seems basic, but yet it's important to tell it again and again and tell it what it looks like, especially as we go into 2024. So we're already coming up with a game plan for what that looks like, what election stories we're going to do. That's just one of many. Then you have the threat of election workers. Do I want to be an election worker right now? Right? The threats. Then we're talking about the poll workers, why you can't get poll workers, especially poll workers of color. You ain't paying them, right? And it's a long day, and we're intimidated by it, or what are those factors. Then we're looking at, let's talk about who's voting, or why we're not voting. So we're doing GOTV stuff. But part of it, I mean, y'all all know all those stories, and that's we're laying them out. But part of it is making sure we do it early, right? Not wait until next year, not wait until right before election, or when all of a sudden we start looking at, oh, black folk are voting? Are they going to vote? Let's do that stuff now. Let's get to know those folks now, and make sure you connect with them in the way, like you said, whether it's going to the barbershop or whether it's going to the store. More importantly, are you going to the churches, right, where a lot of that's happening? So that's where we make sure that we're doing it early, making those connections, making sure you know the right folks so that they can bridge it for you. Because I'm a national correspondent. They throw me into a community. I'm going to Georgia. Right? I don't know nobody in Georgia. But yet, because you've developed those relationships early and on, they can bridge the gap. So when Debbie's coming to Atlanta, y'all, take her call, meet with her, show her the groups. So all these things, probably most of y'all already know that, but make sure you take advantage of that early in the game. Am I answering your question?
Absolutely. Okay. And Frankie, we're at a moment where we're seeing rise in anti-Asian hate. And we know that Asian Americans may be victimized, but they're not victims. They have their own agency. What do you do to foster that story, that Asian Americans are responding to this moment, they're seeing what's happening, and they're not sitting idle. We don't have those stereotypes as they take it and run with it and say that's the way life is. That's not true. What do you do to help your readers understand what's going on in this space and how they're responding?
Well, Asian Americans are definitely running for office in record numbers. I think this increases every single year. And at Reappropriate, we used to at least partner with Run for Something and profile Asian Americans with a progressive platform on our website, so that, you know, for some of the ones who are running for smaller offices on a more local level, sometimes we are the only coverage that they get. And we want to make sure that we're helping them, you know, get noticed, connect with their constituents, get their platform out there so that people understand what they're about. Because I think in the past, when there were fewer people running, fewer Asian Americans running for office, there was a very large identity aspect of their campaign, that they want to, you know, basically represent their people literally by being there, and maybe their platform wasn't as important. Or like it wasn't as necessary to have a well-developed platform to get the votes. But now, sometimes, you know, in places where there's a large Asian American community, there are, you know, people running on both sides. They really need to show what they're about to the voters to get the votes, and we're here to spread the word as much as we can.
We now have now the largest number of Asian Americans in public office now, and this has been catapulted, is what Frankie's talking about. Blake, I want to go to you, my fellow Hatter. Blake and I were just talking about here, by the way, we're going to get you story ideas. There is a growing movement of black country singers. Please look that up. I think you should, that's a story. But Blake, how do you keep from getting distracted with the stupid shit on TikTok or Instagram? You are somebody who is in the grassroots space, but you're also, your family was involved in the movement, and you make no apologies about that. So one, how do you keep from being distracted, but also how do you keep your mental health? This space can be very intense. And we know through writers like Ann Moody that later on they had some mental health challenges for the rest of their lives of what they endure. How do you remain focused, and how do you keep your mental health strong?
So when it comes to focus, I mean, it's all about just making sure that we're equipping the communities to be able to tell their story, and just making sure we're keeping communities at the forefront. So a little bit more about Vingle. Like Vingle, I guess, is the grassroots news agency. You can think of it as like the grassroots Associated Press. So like our whole focus is helping newsrooms expand their coverage, like the underrepresented communities around them. So it's all about just helping to build that synergy between like what the stories that newsrooms need to cover, the cross-cultural affairs different varying communities have from all walks of life, and just making sure the communities in these areas. So we go in communities, we train them on how to be local experts to contribute to stories that newsrooms need to cover. And we created this patented technology to help verify the origin of content, so newsrooms be able to see exactly where, when, and how these photos and videos originated, which is so important with the rise of artificial media. And so our whole focus is just about making sure communities are equipped to be able to tell their stories and tell them quickly. And in terms of mental health, I mean, that's a hard one. I'm not gonna lie, but I mean, I think it's the mission, and just realizing that, we have to stand up to make sure these communities are their voices are captured, and if not, then these stories may never be captured. So I think it's just that keep leaning on the mission, and just realizing that community by community we're helping to build a stronger news ecosystem.
Deborah, the word empathy, I keep thinking, returning to that. You have a broad title, you're covering this whole community, that they're different, we're as diverse as we ever are. How do you go about building empathy for folks that you may not know much about, that you want to learn, and you want to humanize them as well? But also in the black community, not everybody here is a Kappa, not everybody here is a Delta or Zeta, right? You've got people in the black belt who are struggling, who don't have access, and you have a lot of responsibility to go and cover those communities. How do you build that empathy?
I think being my authentic self, which comes with that, I think part of it is, you're right, I don't know every community that I cover. I don't know everything about every community that I cover, but I do listen. And I think I listen. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I forgot. I say I try to be my authentic self. I am my authentic self, so I come to the table like that. And part of that is that I acknowledge that I don't know every community that I cover, and I don't know everything about every community I cover. But I listen, and I try to listen well, and I hear you. I make sure I hear you. And I ask. I take the time to get to know the communities. And I think that gives me credibility sometimes in a lot of ways, right? Because they say, okay, she's coming, she says she don't know, she's asking, and she's here to learn it. Or more importantly, I take the time to go in that community and be in that community, right? Get to know the leaders, but not just the leaders, get to know the activists, get to know the waiter or the waitress that you talked about, get to know all of those folks so that they say, okay, she's not just dropping in for today and she out. She's coming in and she's trying to learn it and understand why I feel this way. I understand why we have an issue with that voting rights law or what it means. I think that matters. And then when I come back next week and I'll come back next year or whatever, I've already built that credibility, or the story showed that I heard you, I understood. And if it didn't, y'all let me know that too, so that I can do a better job. And I'll acknowledge that. I think that goes a long way.
So humble yourself when you get into the scene, know and say that you don't know everything. A lot of times reporters go in and think they know everything, and they want to talk about what they know, right? Sometimes you just got to shut them up and just listen. And Frankie, on that spot, empathy, you're in a space where you're covering Asian Americans, and it's important to note that not all Asian Americans are the same. You're going to cover people who are coming from different entry points in the United States, different economic backgrounds. Some are invested into the idea of the model minority, and others are saying, no, we need to deconstruct this. How do you build empathy and meet people where they are to do authentic stories?
That's really tough. And I think when I talk about this with Jen, we just acknowledge that we do have our limits, that we are a very small, humble outlet, and we're not here to, we're not able to cover everything. You know, we are a progressive outlet. So for one thing, we examine and we criticize some of the conservative aspects of our community. Like, you know, we come from a place of love. We don't, tell them that we want to split from you, that we want nothing to do with you, but we want to understand why they're choosing to, attach themselves to platforms or ideas that are against their own interests, against the interests of the people of color. And so I could go on about this forever, but essentially we want to spread the message of unity, of solidarity with other people of color, with the various Asian American communities that make up the larger Asian American identity. We want everyone to understand that there are things that we can all stand for that will benefit all of us to fight white supremacy. But when people do, choose model minority, they choose white adjacency for like short-term gains. We talk about it, as dispassionately as we can, just to say, we don't agree with this, but it's more than just agree to disagree. We think you're hurting yourself when you're in that kind of position. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely, because you're basically presenting the facts, but saying this is what's at risk there.
Yes.
And Blake, on that note, I hear a lot of folks of color, they'll critique us and say, well, we're all not out poor. Why are you covering this? And what they mean is like, I'm not poor. Look at my Gucci bag, right? Look at my expensive shoes. I'm not poor. But for empathy, there are still a lot of poor people in this country. You just drive north of where you live in Atlanta and you'll hit the Black Belt. How do you reinforce that we need to talk about those struggling with poverty, that there's still unfinished business from the Poor People's March, from the War on Poverty, and that in many cases, they're still living like they did in 1968. How do you do that?
It goes back to what I said before. Every community has a unique narrative, and that you have to equip them to be able to share that narrative. It's not it's a difference when you're telling the story from the outside in and hearing it from the inside out. And we're all about just getting as much of those inside-out details as possible. Like you talked about go north of Atlanta. I just came back from Jackson, Mississippi. That city needs a lot of help. That city I was born in, city I know very dearly. And it's like there's tons of forgotten parts of places like Mississippi that you don't ever hear about. And it's really just because of racism, that people just vacate them and just let them deal with that. And again, it's not the news, and it's not. We have to do everything we can to decentralize how storytelling is done in 2023, 2024, and beyond by making sure we're able to source stories in an equitable way. And I feel like that's just how what our approach is, and what we believe in is that the best way is just to get the grassroots narratives of what's really going on and showing the reality that people are living in.
Blake just brought up something. When you said Mississippi, I keep thinking of when you go cover places like the Navajo Nation or the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, the home of the Oglala Lakota. Don't focus on the dogs, please. Folks go to the reservation and they talk about how bad the dogs are treated when grandma ain't got water, right? The kids are playing on the ground with feces. But I'll see every once in a while someone, and I can tell it's the first time they go to res, they say, oh, look how bad the dogs are treated, as opposed to the people. So I just want to bring that up. Frankie, going back to you. What's your purpose? Because right now you're right in the part. You do not apologize. You're coming from a progressive point of view. You're critiquing society. You're posing questions. But at the end of the day, what do you hope they get from your reporting when you're done and they're reading it and they walk away? What do you hope happens?
I think the biggest hope and goal that we have is to just help Asian Americans understand their own politics better, to develop their own points of view, to understand, where they stand in the country amongst all these different communities. Because, coming from the Chinese American community, a lot of people, a lot of them are new immigrants, and historically, people say that Asian Americans are not very politicized. This isn't exactly true, but it is true that a lot of Asian Americans immigrate to this country, and they're more interested in making a living, in, you know, the more material aspect of the American dream. And, you know, I don't think that's enough. When I came to this country with my parents, it was the same. We were just, you know, my parents said, just focus on your studies, get a good white collar job, and, you know, be satisfied. And now that I'm older, now that I'm the same age as when they came to this country, I realized it's not enough to try to have that, because those things can be fucked up and taken away from you by policies that don't see us as people, that see us as expendable. And I want our little platform to show Asian Americans what's at stake and what they can do. And, you know, when they're being manipulated by, you know, the likes of Edward Blum, who tried to drive a wedge between the Asian community and, you know, the Black community, I want them to know that they're being taken for a ride. I want them to see this country and the politics for what it is and make informed decisions.
Deborah, you also don't apologize what you want people to get out of your stories at all.
I mean, not at all. No, not at all. This might sound corny, especially as a seasoned journalist, but to tell them the truth, I kind of just want to tell the truth, and that may be the truth of other people, of people of color, not just people of color. It's everybody's story, right? So I think, and I've lived with this for a long time, feeling like a kind of responsibility, and how to balance that responsibility, and feeling the ancestors kind of giving a nod sometimes to telling some of these stories. But I feel like that's what I got to do, and that is to shine light, and this, again, might sound like a cliche, shine light on stories and issues that are affecting people. And many times it's people of color, or many times it's people who don't have a voice, it's people with special needs, people are living in native lands, people of color, because we don't always hear it. We don't always get to tell it. I have that platform. I take that responsibility seriously. I know what I can. I'm using it the best way I can. Going to continue to do that. I get a lot of nasty emails, y'all. That's okay. But this last story I did, it reminded me that it's okay. I did this story about Black churches in Florida stepping up to teach Black history on their own. They're like, yo, we got, what? Bible study, we're going to teach it. Sunday school, we're going to teach it. From the pulpit, we're going to teach it. And I got a lot of nasty ones, but then I got a whole lot from readers all over saying thank you. And it's been a minute since I got a whole lot of positive ones, and I felt some kind of way that it wasn't that big. I mean, it's a story, a couple of days, it's what we do, turn it around. But yet the impact of folks feeling like they were heard, or that a story was heard or said or done that mattered to them. And that matters to me. So it's going to be another one coming too. So
Can't wait. Blake, misinformation. That's also something that you guys tackle. We all have the movement of artificial intelligence coming up. We got to be cognizant of that. But what keeps you up at night about misinformation? You're following that. Your organization is really looking into that. That we know through bots, through campaigns, can really manipulate a story and how we see either something that happens in Black history, something that's happened to a brother getting shot. What are some things that keep you up at night about that space that can be very detrimental to the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, artificial media in general is very dangerous. You know, we've gotten to the point that literally you have to check the origin of anything you see online, because it's just things, AI have gone to the point it's so good, which we all know, and I'm not saying anything new, that like it can create an image that basically looks like a human took it, you know. So it's just now, especially going into next year, it's like we have to make sure that we are encouraging the public, and in general, we know the origin of all content we see online. And you know, that's a big part of what we do. I mentioned like the way we verify information. We use public ledger technology to help, you know, just track the origin of where, when, and how photos and videos are being submitted, and just make sure we create a transparent record for the public and for newsrooms, for they can help. And I want to actually say something, is that I think the biggest issue, because misinformation is so prolific now, is that like everyone has to almost collaborate on that front of like making sure we know the origin of where insights are coming from, because if not, it's just we're doing each other a disservice.
On that front, we have a lot of experts in the room. It's not just journalists. So, Deborah, can you give anybody tips on how to pitch a better story? We get a lot of pitches and from academics, and usually sometimes you'll give us 3 paragraphs of your bio first before you get to why you're emailing us. I know who you are, cousin. It's cool. I know what book you wrote. Why you hitting me up? Right? How can our expert cousins do a better job at pitching stories?
We appreciate y'all. Let's start with that. We appreciate our expert cousins. We really do, especially when we call y'all on deadline for a story that's due in a couple of hours, and y'all call us back and give us the information and some great quotes. So thank you for that. Let's start with that. But many of us are hustling and we're rolling, right? So we get that email and it's like this, but what you want us to know, right? You got a new report coming out that's about voting rights? Bet. Tell me in the first couple of sentences, right? And like Russell just said, your bio and stuff, we know you're an expert, right? We're going to lean on you, especially if you're from an HBCU or another school like that, we're going to lean on you or put you on the Rolodex, even if it's not now. So short, tight, this is a new report coming out, Pew, wherever, a new report coming out. It has voting, da-da-da, we got you. Please call us back that same day, if you could, right? Or if you can't, give us the reality check. I can't get to you now, or here's another expert you can talk to. Just share. Y'all have colleagues, y'all know if you can't hit me today, but call the professor over at Mississippi State or Jackson State or whatever, and then I'll remember that you sent me somewhere else, and I'll come back to you too. I'm not gonna forget, right? So if that's that, timely. It's an issue happening tomorrow. Congress is having a hearing on election fraud or something like that. Hit us now, not next week, right? Just think about the timeliness of what we do, and the cycle doesn't end for us. We're always going. But just so last ones. Every once in a while, sometimes it's just, I might just call you, there's no story today, right? But can we just chat a little bit about what I need to watch for?
Preach. When
they get ready to do the legislatures and the voting rights? Can I just talk for a minute? Not on deadline. And I'm not trying to press you, but just throw some ideas at me, some things. Tell me what I need to watch for so I don't miss the story and we can be on top of it.
And Frankie, how do you also get people to, because they're constantly raising their hand saying, y'all may be over here, we're focused on this person getting shot, but there's also some things going on in San Francisco that you don't know about. How do you make sure that you still interject what you're covering to say this matters too? We should be following this. The cable opinion channels may be over here, but you need to say, I'm about to serve you some broccoli that you need to know. How do you do that?
I'm not quite sure what the question is. I'm sorry.
Well, your stories are important.
Yes.
We need that broccoli or else we're going to get cancer, right? How do you make sure that the stories that you write, that you make sure that we are reading those too to get us focused on what's going on in the areas that you cover?
Well, Reappropriate is, at its heart, very anti-establishment. So I think we always do try to look at the stories that are not getting all of the attention that's almost, because sometimes the big stories are almost like entertainment. People are sort of looking for, the sex, the blood, the intrigue. And yeah, the broccoli is not that glamorous, but this is just kind of what we're about. It's not fun necessarily a lot of times to read the things that run on Reappropriate, but it's good for you. And we're very, very honest about it. You're not here to enjoy. You're here to do some homework, but you'll be better for it.